Missing the Middle. Hi, I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. This is the first day from the Fundraising School, and I'm joined today by Mark Rovner of Sea Change Strategies. And Mark and his colleagues have come out with a very interesting study about mid-level donors. Now, when I say missing the middle, I'm not talking about the TV show that was based in Indiana, in a fictional town with a lot of references to the university where I work, Indiana University. No, we're talking about mid-level donors. And I had an opportunity to hear Mark at AFP Icons Conference in Seattle in 2025, one of the best workshops I've had an opportunity to experience. And Mark, thanks so much for being with us on the Fundraising Schools podcast.
It's a real pleasure to see you again.
Same here, Mark. And first of all, what is a mid-level donor?
That's a fair question because it does vary a little bit from organization to organization. But when we think about individual giving, generally, we think about the annual fund group, also known in some organizations as low dollar or grassroots donors. And we think of major donors, the people who are writing the big checks, the $100,000 checks, the $50,000 checks. Wedged in between is a group of people who've always been there, but for a number of reasons, don't get the attention they deserve. They generate a lot of money. They are really loyal to the organizations they help, but they don't exactly match the organizational culture of most fundraising organizations. And that's why we've called our series of studies, going back 12 years now, the missing middle. The problem of being a little bit ignored by these two groups is they get neglected. They don't get contacted. They don't get engaged. And eventually they go elsewhere.
And so I cannot concur enough with you, which is what led me to your workshop, that a lot of sessions on how to start your annual fund, build your annual fund, how to attract, major gifts. What about for you? What was the epiphany for you and your colleagues now 4 studies in to say, there's something here that deserves more attention? What was that starting point for you?
When we started Sea Change in 2006, we mostly were working on digital fundraising. That was our niche. And we started to suspect that there were wealthy people who were online. That was actually a controversial notion in 2006, 20 years ago or so. So we worked with Convio, which has now been folded into Blackbot, and Edge Research to do a major study to see if we could demonstrate that there were wealthy people, not only online, but online and reachable within organizations. We surveyed 23 different organizations, and we found, yes, indeed, these people exist. But the epiphany came from one stat that came out of this. We were looking at donors between $1,000 and $10,000 a year, which, by the way, is kind of the canonical mid-level measure. There's some people go lower, some people go a lot higher, but 1 to 10 still is kind of the midpoint. Looking at those mid-level donors, those 3,000 or 4,000 mid-level donors, we found that they represented 1% of all the donors from the organizations participating, and they were generating 30% of the money. So this small, neglected sliver of donors was producing an enormous percentage of income. And that was it. We've been all about mid-level ever since because we saw the need to make sure that these donors get the treatment that they deserve and the engagement that they want, because they do grow up to be major donors. They grow up to be planned givers. And they generate a lot of wealth.
And as a visionary leader, you come across those data and you think, wow, 30% of the donated dollars from just 1% of the donors, and we're not even trying and paying too much attention to these folks intentionally. What could happen if we learned more about them and became more intentional?
Exactly. So the very first missing middle study was just to do a survey of nonprofits. It was mostly people we've worked with or people we knew. How are they structured? How are they organized? What do you know about these donors? What are the retention rates? And we discovered it was a little bit Wild West back in 2013, 2014, but the retention rates were sky high, especially compared to lower dollar donors.
And again, we're talking about the study, The Missing Middle, which has occurred 4 times, most recently in 2024. And Mark, let's look at some of the demographics. What do we know about these folks? And again, at the Fundraising School, we take great pride in being research-based, evidence-based, while also reminding our participants, this is social science. So it's not just a one-size-fits-all. Folks, as you hear Mark describe these things, you'll know people who are different, don't fit these categories necessarily, but the data are strong and point us in some definite directions. What do we know demographically, Mark, typically about these mid-level donors?
Demographically, they look a lot like the donors you report on in Giving USA. They're the average mid-level donor in our study, there were 5,919 donors from 36 different organizations. It was a good data set. Average age 68 years old. Slight majority women. We survey organizations all the time. That's pretty normal. Overwhelmingly white, which unfortunately continues to be the case after many years of effort. Highly educated.
Mark, one of the things I want to ask you about is, there's so much talk about donor retention that your data found while these folks donate just once a year, they are in this for the long term. In fact, many of the nonprofits they support, they have supported maybe even since their childhood, that these are long-time committed folks.
A huge percentage of these donors have been on the giving file of the organization we were surveying for 20 years or more. And we know from the organizations we've worked with and other data that they'll come into the low dollar file and they'll work their way up to the mid-level. But once they get there, they stay. They stay or they even move up. A third of them leave bequests. A third of these donors leave bequests.
And another fourth are planning on doing so. You add that together, that's more than half, which shows, again, the long-term potential with these wonderful donors. Now, this is one of the data points that jumped out for me. It would be so easy to think. I love how you said kind of the typical understanding, general understanding of mid-level donating is $1,000 to $10,000. I would think like, okay, these are good middle-class folks, and they're always going to donate $1,000 or $2,000. I'll let you have the big reveal, Mark. What were some of the income ranges that you saw as you learned more about these donors?
Well, a majority of them have net worths over $1 million. They're not super rich. They're not mega donors, but I would describe them predominantly as upper middle class, almost overwhelmingly.
And that's net worth, not income. They're not necessarily going to donate the wealth out of their house, for example. But Mark, that data point just does show when stewarded properly, meaning folks had their philanthropic motivations, the potential to help these folks see opportunities to move up in that donor pyramid with that long-term relationship with our nonprofit.
You just said the most important words, when stewarded properly. You've got a culture problem and an organizational problem at a lot of organizations that are very well organized to do direct response, low dollar fundraising, that are very well organized to bring in the huge donors. And those major gift officers are under unrelenting pressure to bring in the 7-figure gifts, the 8-figure gifts. There's no one organized. There's no playbook for mid-level. And so that stewarded properly is exactly the challenge.
A couple of other points about these folks before we get to the playbook that Mark and his colleagues have provided for us in how to identify and work with mid-level donors. About half of these folks volunteer. That's notable because the average in the United States now is down to around 25%. So these folks are twice more likely than average to volunteer for our nonprofits. And by the way, they do their homework. They're going to be looking at our websites and our social and our materials, asking us a lot of questions. So be sure to be ready for that. And as we move then, Mark, to this playbook, you and your colleagues have seen 3 categories of the typical mid-level donor with encouragement to focus on one category in particular. Can you help our audience understand that, please?
Yeah, we did a psychographic profile based on cluster analysis. We work with a brilliant team at Edge Research who do the heavy quantitative work. And they identified three segments. The first segment, it's actually the largest segment, we call all business. It's about 40%. These people are kind of set and forget donors. They don't want to go to your party. They don't want to talk to an NGO. They don't want to get the newsletter. They probably want a tax receipt and maybe an impact report, and they're happy. And in fact, if people reach out to them too much, sometimes they get annoyed. And so they're awesome, but they're hard to upgrade because they don't really want to be engaged. The other end of the spectrum, about 30%, I'm not remembering the exact percentages at the moment, but about 30% are already deeply engaged with the organizations that they support. They're on volunteer committees, they're board members, they're junior board members, they table at fairs. They already belong to an organization that they've made a long-term commitment. Right in the middle, 30 some odd percent. These numbers vary hugely from organization to organization. We can talk about that in a minute, are what we call engagement seekers. And these are the donors who want to be invited to the party, who want the updates, who want everything. They want to know what's going on. They want the connection, and they respond to that connection potentially by giving more. They're twice as likely as either of those other two segments to say that they're going to increase their giving in the coming year. And that's where we see the most leverage for bringing those middle donors either up higher within the mid-tier or into major giving, and certainly with an eye towards planned giving.
So three categories: all business, I make my one donation, send me my receipt, I'm good. Maybe one newsletter, but not much more. Hands-on is the other category. I'm already all in. I'm volunteering to coach the team. I'm stuffing the envelopes, helping with the event, maybe serving on the board or a committee. I'm already hands-on. But these engagement seekers are engaged and are looking for more. It does beg the question, Mark, how do I know? Like, how do I know who's in which category? And then once I identify who I think the engagement seekers are, what types of steps should I be taking with them to build that relationship?
Great question, because obviously they're not going to be subject to the psychographic profiling we did, but we've identified a couple of strategies for finding them. Some are behavioral. Are they opening your emails? Simple thing. Are they giving more than once a year? Are they signing up for the webinars or coming to the briefings? They're already kind of voting with their feet, digitally or actually. So that's one way to do it. The other way is to survey them. And I think there are at least two ways to do that, which is when they make a gift, get the gift, particularly if they're making it online. A lot of these people donate online with their credit cards. I think people still want their frequent flyer miles. At the end of that process, ask them, how do they want to be treated? I've been in this business for 25 years now, and it blows my mind how rarely donors are asked that question. I think sometimes people are afraid that the answer will be leave me alone, which is fair, but donors are crying out for more control over their giving relationship. So at the end of every donation, ask them and send out a survey once or twice a year and give them three choices that summarize those three categories and say, which one fits you the best? You'll get a good answer. We've been doing that since the study came out with our proprietary clients.
And Mark, I would think if somebody is all business, they're going to help us know that. Like, hey, I don't need all the calls. I don't need all the letters, all the things. Hands-on, you're obviously going to see who those folks are because they're so deeply committed as volunteers and donors. And then these engagement seekers, they open the email, they follow us on social, they like, they comment, they share other ways that they open the emails. And Mark, I would just add anecdotally, as I teach around the United States and even internationally, the nonprofits that are sending out the surveys, they want the surveys of the donors to be meaningful, of course. But even regardless of the responses, the very act of sending the survey back, that somebody took time to open it, fill it out, send it back is just a nice little toe in the water of engagement.
Let me ask a pro tip, because one of my pet peeves, and it wipes out all the benefit of that, is when you send surveys that ask questions like, is cancer bad? Yes or no, and lands you on a donate page. Donors, we survey donors on a monthly basis for organizations. They know. And when we send those surveys, that begins with a promise, you will not be solicited. And they always say thank you, because they are the recipients of those faux surveys. So stop it, all of you.
Mark, this is such wonderful information, both the data-driven, the empirical evidence that you're bringing us, as well as these recommendations. As we conclude, what advice would you just have? You've been in this field for such a long time. I just greatly appreciate the thoughtful way, the empirical way that you take a look at this work. What advice do you have for fundraisers who want to be able to obtain this report, which, by the way, is available for free on the Change Strategies website? What advice do you have for fundraisers to put this into practice?
First thing is take stock. Look at your giving pyramid. Who's where? Identify who those donors are. See what you can learn about them passively. What is their behavior? Have they signed up for your email list? What other kinds of behavior? Survey them and let them tell you what kind of relationship they want. And then make sure you're staffing that level. Remember, they are a giant feeder into planned gifts. They may not at the moment be a giant feeder into major gifts. 10% said they were going to increase their giving, but 10%, if they're turning into major gifts, is a not insignificant sum of money. So make sure you've got enough staff. Make sure that there's at least one person on your team, unless you're tiny, who's really specializing in mid-level and understands the importance of creating this kind of hybrid program that has a direct response dimension and has kind of what my business partner calls stewardship at scale, meaning a light touch. You're not going to be able to afford MGOs, and most of them don't want MGO kinds of treatment. But someone who understands bringing together a little bit of high touch and a rock solid direct marketing program.
And again, the fundraising opportunity, the volume collectively of these donors together, let alone that percentage that could become major gift donors. And remember, folks, a substantial percentage of these folks have a net worth greater than $1 million. And that's where the estate comes in. And that's where the planned gift opportunity comes in with these donors. Mark Rovner with Change Strategies. Mark, thanks so much again for informing us, teaching us, encouraging us on this edition of the First Day podcast from the Fundraising School. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
And I also want to say, again, I saw Mark at AFP Icon, yet another reason to be a member of your local AFP, which then feeds into this big international conference every year. A lot of great expertise that's gathered by our good friends at AFP. Now, here at the Fundraising School, we have more than 24 courses. We teach annual fund, we teach mid-level donors, and then how things can grow from there to major gifts, campaigns, planned giving, through the methods, including digital and special events, and of course, foundations and businesses, leadership, all of these courses available from the Fundraising School in 10 U.S. cities, and of course, anywhere in the United States online. We can customize training for you, either a course by itself or parts of courses that we knit together, tailor-made just for you, your nonprofit, your association, your geography. We have quarterly webinars and these weekly podcasts. And of course, we have our textbook, Achieving Excellence in Fundraising, the book now out in its 5th edition. Where do you find us? Online at go.iu.edu/TFRS for the Fundraising School. Again, I'm grateful for our guest today, Mark Rovner, in a podcast produced by Jennifer Boffman, CFRM, and the Emmy Award winner, Mike Anthony. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. Now you are now more fully informed on this first day from the Fundraising School.